couscous is a North African staple dish that made its way into Israel through migration. In a book from 1969, it was described as one of Morocco's national dishes, made up of semolina flour and designed to be a light and smooth product. Couscous in Morocco was commonly used in stews filled with spices among many other things. After Israel became a state in 1948, there was a rush of immigration into the state. Moroccan Jews immigrated to Israel over a longer period of time and in a series of waves, with the majority coming between 1955 and 1957. By 1973, the majority of Morocco's Jewish population had immigrated, bringing along their staple dishes with them, like couscous. Moroccan Jews followed a distinctive mobility route, and upon settling and organizing primarily in developmental towns, they became seen as a prototypical Israeli ethnic group. To consider how Moroccan immigration and immigration in general impacted Israeli cuisine, we must first discuss about what Israeli cuisine was like before the mass migration and how Jews in the diaspora ate. In the 2,000 years of dispersion from Israel, Jews wandered around country to country and often used and ate whatever food was available that was within kosher restrictions. Ideas about gathering and preparing food revolved around the location they were settled in and what the country had to offer. Thus, when immigration to Israel began, these new ideas that were gathered were brought to Israel, and the most delectable and economically favorable dishes from each nation were integrated into Israeli cuisine and Jewish cookery. Settling in Israel was not always easy, and an entryway was necessary for many to integrate into society. Professor Angrist from Boston University shares some ideas about how immigrants were able to fit into society once they arrived.
But food always was the entryway. I mean, North African or Mizrahi food was always popular, even among Ashkenazi Jews.
Due to the influx of migration after 1948, Israel had to institute emergency rationing for the distribution of food and many other goods. This rationing was put in place by the British authorities in Palestine until around 1959. Rationing cards and coupons were distributed to limit food consumption and the purchase of other commodities and goods. During this rationing, the Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, tried to come up with ways to feed a large amount of people with the available ingredients that Israel had. He tasked Osam, one of Israel's largest food manufacturers and distributors, with creating an inexpensive starch that could replace rice. This resulted in an extruded wheat paste in the form of rice granules, but was dried and toasted and eventually took the shape of a pearl. This starch was known as Israeli couscous. Israeli couscous has larger granules than traditional couscous, and its granules are made of baked wheat. After food rationing was no longer required, Israeli couscous continued as a staple comfort food in the Israeli kitchen. Now that we have covered how couscous was brought to Israel and the effect of mass migration, we can discuss what Israeli cuisine actually is and how couscous fits into it. I have some experts that shared their insights as to what Israeli cuisine is. We will begin with Professor Angrist.
Is there an Israeli cuisine, and what defines Israeli cuisine? Most people, including me, would say that it's a mixed ethnic food.
Next, we will hear from Abukasis, who has family that immigrated from Morocco to Israel.
Israel is a real melting pot. So how I would view it would be very different than somebody who is from culturally a very different background, because there's nothing really Israeli.
As you can tell, Israeli cuisine is not a set cuisine and is the product of years of migration into Israel. The foods that were carried into Israel during these times, like couscous, were essential in creating a diverse food scene that still exists today. Couscous carried a life for many people in Israel and around the world.
And it's a whole celebration when they make couscous. I mean, it's a festival.
While some people today choose to make couscous and Israeli couscous from a box, others have kept a tradition and make it from scratch. Abukasis, whose husband and family immigrated from Morocco to Israel, details how her mother-in-law makes it from scratch.
She would take the semolina, which comes in what looks like a flour bag, and pour it into this bowl, and she would sprinkle it with water, and with her hand she would very gently, kind of in a circular motion, would I don't even know what it does, but it made all these very small little balls.
Today, Moroccan Jews make up the second largest Jewish community in Israel. Their dishes, like couscous that they brought with them, have helped diversify Israeli cuisine and made it into the melting pot of cuisines and culture that it is today. Thanks for watching.